Let me ask you something that most people never say out loud. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt like you didn't belong there? Even when no one was being unkind, even when nothing was technically wrong. You laugh when others laugh. You speak when it's your turn. You're present. And yet, something inside you stays slightly removed, like you're watching life through glass. That feeling of being an outsider everywhere isn't imagination, and it isn't a personality flaw. It's a psychological pattern, and once you understand it, you realize it's not that you don't belong, it's that your nervous system learned to live on the edge of rooms instead of inside them. People who feel like outsiders everywhere often grow up learning early that fitting in was conditional, not necessarily abusive, not always dramatic, just inconsistent. Sometimes you were understood, sometimes you weren't. Sometimes you were praised for who you were, other times for who you pretended to be. And your mind adapted. You learned to observe before engaging, to read the emotional temperature of a room before revealing yourself, to stay flexible, to stay safe. Psychology calls this contextual self-monitoring, but lived experience calls it never fully relaxing. You become someone who belongs enough everywhere, but never completely anywhere. And that's the paradox. Because people like this are often socially skilled. They know how to talk. They know how to listen. They know how to blend. They're rarely awkward. They're rarely rejected. And yet they still feel outside. Because belonging isn't about being accepted, it's about being recognized. And recognition requires exposure, which feels dangerous to a mind that learned that visibility once came with cost. Many outsiders didn't feel misunderstood once. They felt misunderstood repeatedly. So instead of asking, "Why don't they get me?" the psyche quietly asked, "How do I adapt?" And adaptation became identity. You learned to shape-shift. Different versions of you for different environments. Professional you, funny you, quiet you, useful you. None of them fake, but none of them complete. So when people say, "I feel like I don't belong anywhere," what they're often really saying is, "I don't know where I'm allowed to be all of me." And that's not loneliness. That's fragmentation. There's another layer here that rarely gets talked about. People who feel like outsiders everywhere are often highly perceptive. They notice subtleties others miss, tone shifts, power dynamics, unspoken rules. And once you see those things, you can't unsee them. Belonging becomes harder when you're aware of the performance. Because groups often bond through shared illusions, shared stories, shared simplifications. And outsiders tend to see the cracks. They see how belonging sometimes requires shrinking truth or exaggerating sameness. And something inside them refuses to fully participate, not out of arrogance, out of integrity. But integrity can be isolating, because when you don't lie to yourself, you start noticing where you're tolerated rather than known. Many outsiders also carry something called relational displacement. It happens when connection comes early, but stability doesn't. You may have moved a lot, changed environments, outgrown people quickly, or learned that closeness didn't last. So your psyche learned not to anchor too deeply. You learned to stay emotionally mobile, capable of connection, but always ready to leave. Not because you want to, but because staying once hurt more than leaving. So you hover, close enough to belong, far enough to protect yourself. And over time, that hovering becomes familiar, even comfortable, but also quietly exhausting. Because the truth is, humans aren't meant to live permanently on the edge of rooms. They're meant to rest somewhere. Here's something important. Feeling like an outsider everywhere does not mean you are unlovable. It often means you developed before your environment caught up with you. Your questions got deeper before the people around you were ready to ask them. Your inner world expanded before you had mirrors for it. So you learned to hold it alone. That's not a failure of character. That's a mismatch of timing. But here's where it gets painful. When you've spent long enough feeling like an outsider, you start internalizing it. You stop asking, "Where do I belong?" and start asking, "What's wrong with me?" And that question quietly reshapes your life. You hesitate to take up space. You assume others have closer bonds than you do. You downplay your uniqueness because it feels like the reason you're separate. But uniqueness was never the problem. The problem was never being met. Belonging isn't about sameness. It's about safety. And people who feel like outsiders everywhere often never learned what safe belonging feels like. So they mistake intensity for intimacy, compatibility for connection, familiarity for home. And when it doesn't last, they blame themselves again. Here's the reframe that changes everything. You are not an outsider everywhere. You are someone whose nervous system hasn't yet experienced consistent emotional resonance. You haven't felt what it's like to be reflected without distortion, to be understood without explanation, to exist without translation. And until that happens, your system stays alert, waiting. The healing doesn't start with forcing yourself to fit in better. It starts with asking, where do I feel slightly less guarded? Not fully safe, not perfectly understood, just less braced. Those moments are clues. They show you the direction your nervous system wants to go. And slowly, very slowly, you build belonging the way your system needs it. One honest connection at a time. One environment where you don't have to edit yourself as much. One place where silence doesn't feel like rejection. And here's the part most people don't realize. Outsiders make the deepest connectors once they stop trying to belong everywhere. Because when you finally find resonance, you don't take it for granted. You don't perform. You don't rush. You stay. And you let yourself be seen. So if you've spent your life feeling like you don't belong anywhere, don't rush to fix it. You're not broken. You're discerning. You're sensitive to truth, and you're wired for depth. You were never meant to disappear into crowds. You were meant to be recognized by the few who can actually see you. And when that happens, you won't feel like an outsider anymore. Not because you changed, but because you finally arrived somewhere you didn't have to leave yourself behind. And that is what belonging really is.